It says, the meal is a rich and historic part of the liturgy. We invite all people forward to participate who have been baptized and are actively seeking to follow Jesus as Lord, which would include children, right? Because we talked about how children, earlier, how children are baptized in the context of a family that's also members of the church. And it says at each family's discretion, baptized children are welcome to partake of communion. If you would rather your child receive a blessing instead, and then it goes on to give instructions about that. It's interesting to consider how this positions the child, though. The child is assumed to be able to access the faith, and yet is moderated by parents' choice. And so the child is in this liminal space between full membership and not membership. They're members, but not quite. There's a dependency there in which they are students, and they're sort of being brought up. The assumption is to be able to take the communion, but that's at the discretion of the parents. Looking at how it positions parents then are treated as actively discipling their children or socializing their children. There's no instruction given for what criteria a parent might look for. Furthermore, there's not a sort of checkbox where you enable your child to take communion once and they can take it for the rest of the time. There's an assumption that each week you're making that decision for your child. The church then is positioned to assist the parent in it, but not to override the parent's determination. So the hierarchical structure is in place. There's an assumption about repetition. The children are invited, after all, to participate in the service. And the idea is that the constant repetition of the prayers, which stay the same from week to week, might be part of the inculcation of religious belief. The next artifact then I want to look at shifts the dynamic a little. Because the dynamic ceases to be one in which the parent is the source of religious belief and the child just the recipient, and becomes one in which the parent and child dialogue about religious belief. This artifact is a document. It's an article published. This next artifact is an article from the magazine Christianity Today, which is a sort of flagship evangelical American Christian publication. It's titled, "The Biggest Hindrance to Your Kid's Faith Isn't Doubt, It's Silence." And so, again, we're looking for a shift in the way that children and parents are conceptualized. The article is looking at understanding adolescent faith and understanding how to pass on your faith to adolescents. This is very different from the liturgical text in that this text is written from the assumption that parents are wondering about their children's faith, that they're not sure what their children believe or how to communicate their faith to the children. Whereas in the liturgical text, the parent is positioned as being the source of religious information in the child's life. The text talks about the importance of building a partnership with a child, of giving your child room to criticize the things that they don't like about your faith. Again, sort of a foreign concept to the liturgical text. And the text assumes that the child has a faith of their own and sort of an autonomous existence, which again is sort of different from this idea that the child is situated within the family system only. The text is an instructional manual. It has bullet points later on that talk about sort of how to create space where you can dialogue and how to encourage your children to talk about what they believe. There's an interesting point where the author recommends ask your children what things they believe that they think you don't believe, and what things they think you believe that they don't believe. So again, the goal here is conceptualized as a dialogue rather than an instruction. The hierarchy is sort of diminished. The final artifact that I'd like to present is a podcast. So I don't have a way to show it to you, but it's called Word on Fire. It's a Catholic publication. And this episode is called Evangelizing the Nuns. The nuns is a sociology of religion term. It doesn't have to do with monastic orders or with nuns. N-U-N. It's N-O-N-E-S. It's a way to describe a demographic trend in which adolescents are increasingly identifying as non-religious or spiritual but not religious. The podcast is about trying to understand that demographic shift, that movement. The podcast is not written to people that identify as not religious. It's written to concerned parties, particularly parents or caregivers whose adolescents have identified in this way, and is trying to understand what is motivating these decisions and how they can continue to share their faith with their children. we see sort of the full shift in terms of positioning the child. The child is no longer even conceptualized as within the system, but is rather, in terms of faith, completely autonomous and perhaps even distinct and different. The parent is not positioned as the source of knowledge, but rather as needing knowledge, as being concerned, perhaps anxious, about the religious position of the child, and needing someone to explain to them how that position came to be and what can be done about it. Thinking about the artifacts overall, then, we see a movement of development through them. If you go chronologically based on when the child is likely to interact with them, you see a shift from the child as being completely dependent to the child being independent, which matches, of course, the developmental process. However, there's disagreement amongst the documents as to the best way to approach the child's developmental state. Does religion need to be stepped down to the child, or does the child need to be sort of moved up to the place where religion is at? Does the child have their own version of religious experiences, like in the nativity scene, or is the child encouraged to participate even if they don't understand all of it, like in the Eucharistic scene? The parent is positioned differently as well. Is the parent a facilitator, or is the parent an informant? Does the parent know what the child needs, or is the parent in need of instruction themselves? Of course, we also talked a little bit about the role in which commerce or sort of consumerism plays into it as well. Things are marketed to parents as aids in their sort of process of religiously socializing their children, such that toys are presented or books are presented as helpful ways. Articles are written that a parent can consume that will then enable them to perform this task. And these are all themes that have come out in sort of a broad overview of artifacts. Were I to do more with the study, I would want to gather artifacts more specific to particular developmental time periods. Lots could be written about the experience of an adolescent parent-child relationship. And then also, all of these assume a normative developmental path in which the child is raised within a homogeneous faith tradition. What if the parents are of different religions? What does that say about the parent-child relationship, or what artifacts might we find? Or what if the parent and the child are of different religions, such that maybe the child is religious and the parent is not, or vice versa? What artifacts might we find, and what insights might be gained from that sort of perspective? However, for the moment, I think that these artifacts give us a perception of what it's like to be a parent or a child within that relationship in a religious setting, with the goal, from the parent at least, of passing on religious belief.